which was the for the viewing of the habitat, and should it be necessary to hear any further evidence, which I fervently hope is not necessary, but I think I identified the 14th and 15th of March. Is that correct? I discovered that my flight from Doha on the 13th did not get me in time in Miami to be able to get here until the next day. So I'm going to ask that it's the 15th and 16th, if that is hopefully not insurmountable difficulty for anyone. Is that all right? All right, lovely, thank you. So it's going to be 15th to view the habitat, Mr. Peterson, if that's possible. If you can tell your clients that that's what we would like to do. And then the 16th as a backup day, should it be necessary. As I say, I firmly hope that it's not. But that's where we are at the moment, so we can make it for the 15th to view the habitat. And then, Sarah, you'll be able to advise everybody else that that is the date for the view. Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Right. Can I ask you, what is your anticipated length of your address? I'm not holding you to it, but give me some sort of idea.
I believe it may be within the 2 hours, or at least the 2 hours.
Right.
I've tried to...
No, that's fine. But if you want to take a short break in the middle of that, and it may be that if I don't, my colleague might, and so pick a moment. We could just take 5 minutes if necessary, but whatever it is, you know, going for 2 hours without stopping is quite a long time to be on your feet. So feel free to pick a moment and we'll just take a short break, all right?
Certainly.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Yes.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioners. One must take care not to cause injury to others, but there is no general duty for the benefit of others. The rule is that I must not harm my neighbor, misfeasance, not that I am required to save him, nonfeasance. The very parable of the Good Samaritan, which was invoked by Lord Atkins in Donahue and Stevenson, illustrates in the conduct of the priest and the Levite who passed by on the other side an omission which was likely to have caused at its reasonable and probable consequence damage to the health of the victim of the thieves, but for which the priest and the Levite would have incurred no civil liability in English law. That's an excerpt taken from Winfield and Jolowitz on 13th edition at page 92. It seems that this legal position is the guiding light which pervades Paria's stance, taken from the onset of their position on the scope of works to the decision not to permit a viable or a rescue plan from being mounted in order to save the men trapped in the 30-inch pipeline at Sea Line 36 on the night of February 25th, 2022. Scope of works. Contrary to reasonable commercial considerations, industry standards, and specifically stated conditions as expressed in the scope of works provided by Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited seems to be saying to this commission that the contract itself, between itself and LMCS, was on a turnkey contract basis. I've extrapolated from various sources the very basic feature of what a turnkey contract best. And those things are the design, sourcing of materials, control or substantial control of site and completion time entirely on the contractor. The turnkey concept of contract envisions that the contractor takes charge of the project. It is not subjected to a system requiring approvals and permits and vesting in the asset owner a stop policy that is directly contradictory to that concept. In fact, In Paria's investigation report, they themselves were not convinced that the contract was a turnkey project. At page 1200 of the core bundle, at clause 1.9, it states, Paria contracted LMCS Limited to execute a turnkey type contract entitled Miscellaneous Repairs and Refurbishment Works at number 5 and number 6 berths. This report was subsequent to the incident, just to be clear. This scope of work was, according to Paria's code system, under code 8107 for installation and maintenance work, which is a category designated by them as high-risk works. And I'd refer to page 7701 of the bundle of submissions. This particular code is instrumental in deciphering, one would expect, the contract and commercial considerations for the job to be tendered. The inherent high-risk component of the contracted works therefore place its execution to be subject to permit to work / standard work instructions / safety rules requirement. And I take that specifically from the scope of works at paragraph 8.2 provided by Paria. There is no inference of the fact of this condition. It is expressed. It follows in the context of industry standards. Paria did not attempt at this initial stage of its contract to extricate itself from this duty and the standard contained in their permit to work, standard work instructions, and safety rules. Paria's position, advanced after the 25th of February, is, however, different. I have read and perused the scope of works from which Paria's condition of work were expressed, and I'm still to find one clause which expresses that any of the contractor bidding for this scope of work was to provide expertise, that is to say, advice on the job. We can accept that the contract is for specialist services and equipment, but this is very different from the argument being mounted by Paria, or what seems to be mounted by Paria, that they required expert advice and the expertise. At the very introduction, and we have gone through this during the course of the cross-examinations of the witnesses, at 1.0 of the scope of work at Paria's page 560 of the core bundle, it says, Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited is seeking to engage the services of an experienced and qualified construction and fabrication contractors for the execution of miscellaneous works detailed below. This scope of works is the basis of what Paria required. It is a document being communicated to a number of contractors that are registered under the service code 8107, which, according to the statement from Paria's Mr. Rajendra Mahes, has some 259 recommended applicants. I'm not sure what amount of applicants were approved, but at least those were the recommended applicants for the purpose of those kinds of work that LMCS had performed.
The work extended beyond just the sea line, though, didn't it? It included, did it not, work on the handrails and various other aspects of the overall bid?
Yeah, there were 3 components to this particular contract.
Yes.
So it's
not all of which would have required the kind of expert or specialist services, whichever way one wants to put it. Not all of which would have required that, would it?
Not that degree, please. I agree.
All right.
I invite you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Commissioner, to look at this scope of works and come to the very quick conclusion that Paria is peddling a narrative of turnkey and specialized contractor and expert in attempting to do nothing more than to shift the duty of care to ensure a safe system of work from itself to squarely land on the shoulders of LMCS Limited. Paria has a clear appreciation of the difference between service contract and advice contract. They must have. I pause to bring to the attention of the Commission. I heard my learned friend for Kenson's submissions yesterday. I know that I wasn't present personally. But it seems to me that Kenson's position is now, or is being advocated to be different from the treatment of which the workers of Paria has been treated with in this commission, and indeed by LMCS. Let me explain just a little bit. For all intents and purposes, work conducted in the premises of Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, which are to be monitored, or whatever other duties devolve to Paria's personnel, whether they be Paria in employment or Kenson in employment, were always and at all material times treated as Paria. In other words, there was an agency understanding. The fact that this may be sees as an issue. It has not been an issue throughout the course of these proceedings.
No.
But
well,
if it,
can I reassure you of this much, that if we deem that it is crucial to our decision-making process that we require sight of the contract or the contractual relationship between Paria and Kenson, then we will convene a hearing for you to argue why we should have it, for us to consider why it might be necessary, and for Paria to be able to respond to that. At the moment, I don't see the need for that at all. All right, so that you can be reassured that if we found that it was necessary, or thought that it might be necessary, or that it might disclose some additional feature that we hitherto don't have, then certainly that's something I will bring to the party's attention, and if necessary, we'll have an argument about it. But at the moment, I don't see that that's necessary.
I'm grateful. The confirmation that LMCS understood that it was a job for the provision of services and equipment are contained in LMCS proposal contained in the core bundle at page 654, where LMCS confirms that the work entails the provision of labor, equipment, material as specified, and supervision for the civil works required. At core bundle, page 658, the work plan would be carried out as follows. LMCS will work with Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited to confirm all engineering requirements for the contract prior to the placement of purchase orders for equipment and material. Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited and LMCS will conduct job hazard analysis, JHAs, and risk assessments as required for all activities associated with the project. And at core bundle, page 656, which says, project control, progress measurements and reporting frequencies and format will be determined by the LMCS and Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited project teams. Paria's reliance on LMCS expert advice, in whichever incarnation of the term, is plainly unsupported and ought to be rejected by this Commission as a matter of fact. Expert. The value of having an expert contractually, called a project consultant or a project engineer, I submit as a fundamental basis upon which Delta P event leading to the death of the 4 LMCS workers rests for several reasons. In the first place, the development of the scope of works lacked crucial information on the layout of C-Line 36. A schematic was presented. There may be no fault on the face of this drawing, but it was clearly misleading. To date,
which drawing are you talking about?
The schematics that is contained in the tender.
In the
scope
tender
of
itself,
works.
right.
In the scope of work. There's that line drawing. To date, we still don't know the exact bottom profile of C-Line 36. The system, it seems from the evidence, is of some vintage. The contract carried out by LMCS, I am sure, will not be the last of contracts to be performed on this system. Paria had and continues to have a duty to contractors to provide services on its system, who are contracted to provide services on its system, to have a comprehensive inspection report. This seems to be, at the very least, common sense. The second aspect of the scope of work deficiency is the glaring lack of the expertise to evaluate the intricacies which this job required. Paria's tender note at page 9 to 8 of the core bundle reads, LMCS has demonstrated that in their prior performance that they have the required management and resource competencies to satisfy the contract requirements. And at page 931, under the rubric technical evaluation, the note simply states, a technical evaluation of 5 bids submitted was conducted by technical and maintenance department, and only 1 bid submission was found to be technically compliant with the requirements of the scope. We know from the evidence that there is question as to the qualification and experience or the expertise that was brought to this evaluation process. From this evidence, Paria is suggesting that LMCS, but Paria is still suggesting that LMCS possessed the expertise. Essentially, it seems to me it's an argument saying that LMCS has hired itself. Doing this clearly place LMCS and its employees at an even higher level of risk in the performance of their work, as is evident by this tragic incident. Paria has admitted to knowing of its option of hiring a project engineer and consultant who would have been qualified or have the requisite expertise to advise on the contract, on the execution of the contract. In fact, this was done for the 2020 contract, similar to the part of the contract to be performed at the subsea at C-Line 36. Saving the dollar at the cost of saving the lives, or at least safety. This is what this decision comes down to. Execution of works.
Do you not think it's a fair point to make that we used LMCS in 2020? We had a project manager then. They did the job without hitch, without complaint. All seemed to go very well. They obviously know what they're doing. Why don't we just use them again? What is wrong with taking the position that we have a perfectly good contractor who has done the same job before?
It's a high-risk job.
Yes.
It is classified high risk for that reason. We should not, no one should be taking the risk, the reason, there's no reasonable approach, if I may say that, in saying that, well, because you have done it before, you may be able to do it perfectly on this occasion as well. The reason, there must be a rationale for the classification of the works to be done. And it was high risk. The purpose and the benefit of having a system in place, of having an expert hired, is to prevent an accident. We can never tell when an accident will happen.
No, of course, but are you saying that irrespective of how many times LMCS might perform this task on behalf of Paria, they would still need to be separately assessed?
At the very least, if they don't possess that expertise within their own structure.
Paria, not
Paria, that is. Yes. Perhaps if it becomes a routine, for example, a routine high-risk maneuvering where all parties involved have because of its frequency, they have the understanding of the maneuvering of the contract and what the job entails, and they have in-house, that is, Paria would have its in-house expertise, and LMCS or any other contractor have their in-house, then there may be no, I'm not submitting that there shouldn't be any at all, but there may be no great need to have that independent expertise on the job hired by Paria.
You mean assessment but not oversight?
Assessment, correct.
How many times? How many times do they have to do it before you would agree that assessment without oversight would be okay?
Well, that would...
Two, three?
No, frequency would, in terms of a high-risk maneuver, can't be two. I humbly submit it certainly can't be one. It must be something. Frequency, the word frequency, it is happening on a regular basis. If there is a job, the contract had that the job performance was to be within 20 days period. So let's say all things are equal and the jobs are carried out within a 20 days window. Then every month there can be a job description similar to this. And on that basis, on every month, 12 times per year, certainly that is frequent enough. But one time, 2 years, or at least a year prior, no. I humbly submit that that would be wholly insufficient.
Wouldn't it also depend, though, on the people who are carrying out the job? It's all very well saying LMCS, but if LMCS used different personnel, wouldn't you want to have oversight over those different personnel? They might do something different.
Certainly. As conditions change, you have to reassess. Certainly. Your personnel is different. Then.
All right. Thank you.
The works were executed presumably under a safe work system, which is Paria's permit to work system, work instruction, and safety system. On the instructions issued by Paria for line clearing, I will submit that this is not a mere internal document. The fact of its incorporation in the scope of works at paragraph 8.0 is telling. The monitoring system for the line content removal rests squarely with Paria. It is Kazim Ali's evidence that the measurement of the line content received was negligible, and LMCS's aim was to ensure knowledge. What is clear is that between the contractor and Paria, there seemed to be a variance as to the amount of the line content to be removed. And that's in the case of...
Can you help me with something that concerns me a little? Am I right in understanding that originally the line content was to be sucked out of the pipe, pumped out?
That was never, and that particular question was placed to Mr. Ali, and that was never his understanding.
He always understood it to be blowing?
Pardon?
He always understood it to be blowing? Blowing?
Oh, the method of...
Yes, the method.
Yes,
I'd
yes.
understood that there was, the original plan was to suck, I mean, I'm not using a very technical word, but to pump out of the line the fluid that they wished to remove to acquire the necessary ullage.
Yeah.
That changed for some reason, which I'm not entirely clear about as yet, to blowing. So, to use the non-technical expressions, sucking out the oil or blowing out the oil. And if you just think of having a straw in a glass, you can suck out what you want and put it and swallow it or put it elsewhere, or you can blow down into the glass and that pushes the fluid out.
My understanding is that it was always regulated by Paria that it should be by air blowing, not air sucking. But at the point where there was no or insufficient content being received by Paria, because there was a limit on the air pressure to be applied. I think it was 40 psi. And at that rate, only a certain amount could have reached onto the tank.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the precise figures of how much pressure was used in order to blow particularly helps. We saw the demonstration from Mr. Khan about putting a tube down the pipe to take out any additional material. But I had understood that there was evidence to suggest that at least originally it was to be sucking, not blowing. So in other words,
introducing
pumping it out by
blowing.
But no, by sucking, pumping something out of the pipe, and that changed for reasons, as I say, I'm not entirely clear about as yet, to blowing. In other words, introducing air into the pipe as opposed to drawing fluid out of the pipe. Those, it seemed to me, are very different scenarios, which may have, and probably did have, very different consequences to the condition of the pipe once the task had been performed.
I understand your inquiry, Mr. Chairman, but from my understanding, I did not appreciate that. I understood it to be that the methodology of getting the content out was shifted based on the location of where the content had to have been placed.
All right. Well,
as opposed to
I'm not going to interrupt your flow at the moment, but I shall have a look at the material myself before you sit down, and then you can address me on it. If I've got this wrong, then so be it. But I don't think I have.
Certainly.
All right.
But I do know that the rationale behind the change of pumping the content to the tank farm and putting it into the slop barge was because of the amount not being.
Yeah, that's a different point, though, isn't it? That's about the collection of the material. That's not what I'm talking about.
I understand.
Yeah.
What is clear is that between the contractor and Paria, there seems to be a variance on the amount of line content to be removed. A clear indication that a single appointed project manager engineer from Paria would have eliminated these misunderstandings. If LMCS knew the amount of content being removed, then it would have been clear that there wasn't a solid leg of liquid under the plug on which its methodology was premised. I'd invite the Commission to look at the evidence of the investigation into the incident with Mr. Dexter Guerra, in which Mr. Guerra had indicated to Mr. Archibald that there was concerns for pollution. It's my submission that that concern could have only been present because of LMCS's understanding that there was line content or there was liquid within that system. And this incident, as we know, happened prior to the 25th of February.
Did LMC... am I not right that LMCS identified the number of barrels that they thought was necessary to be removed?
It was an estimate, indeed.
Yeah, all right.
It was an estimate.
I follow that, an estimate. But they did give a figure, I thought 70. 60, I'm told 60. It's there or thereabouts anyway. But they gave in the documentation an estimate of the number of barrels to be removed.
Which was submitted. This is a document submitted at the tender.
Yes.
Yes, they did. In that scope of work, yes.
Right.
There was an
Is
estimate.
it your case then that that being the figure, that they would have ascertained whether that had been achieved?
No. It really was an estimate that would have been presented.
Yes, but whether it's 60 or 70 barrels, I'm not going to quibble about that. I don't think that that would have caused a huge difference to the outcome. It's quite a big difference between that and hundreds, isn't it?
Oh, certainly.
Right.
Certainly.
So, do you think, first of all, is it your case, rather, that they established or sought to establish the number of barrels being removed from the line?
Their main concern was to achieve the ullage.
And I follow that, but there's a way that, in order to achieve the ullage, there are two ways you can do it, and it seems to me. First of all, you look at how much you need to remove from a full line, which should achieve that ullage. Secondly, you can have a look inside the pipe and see where it is. Which is the more reliable, do you think?
Well, in this case, it seems as though the more reliable would have been to ascertain the amount that would have...
Right. Did they do that?
No.
Right.
No.
Why not?
The measurement of what was being taken out or removed from the sea line 36 was not within the ambit or remit of LMCS.
Nothing wrong with asking, is there? I mean, they're doing the job.
And there was no
you're
way
working,
that...
and just a minute, you're working with Paria, right?
Yes.
These are clients of yours that you've had for a long time, and one might have thought, so, well, where are we now? How much? Particularly as the days go by. This wasn't done in one day. This was done over many days.
Yes.
What was wrong with somebody from Paria, necessarily Mr. Kazim Ali or his son, saying to Paria, look, how far have we got? How much has been taken out?
Well, from my understanding, the LMCS LMCS did inquire from Paria as to what was being removed, and the answer was negligible. That's not an amount. That's not an sustained amount.
Where do I find that evidence?
It's in, I think, this line of cross-examination was put to Mr. Kazim Ali.
Kazim Ali's evidence, all right.
I believe he's day 4 of the transcripts.
All right. So, do you accept that it was incumbent on LMCS to have inquired how much material had been removed from the line?
I do, and we did.
So you say you agree with that. You say it happened. And having been told how much had been removed from the line, you say, I think you used the word negligible. Right? That wasn't... That acting upon that information, they continued to blow into the pipe.
Yes.
Just pause there for a minute. What do you say about the insertion of the smaller pipe, the 6-inch pipe or whatever it was, down inside the riser at berth 6 in order to remove what appeared to be the remainder of the oil in the subsea line, in the horizontal?
It came back to the methodology of trying to get the ullage achieved. So it was done just to be able to achieve what they were trying to achieve, the ullage.
Was there any point in time, do you say, was there any point in time when LMCS were operating on the premise that they were to clear the line?
No. That was never their understanding of how the work was to be done.
It's always your position is, it has always been their position that they should only remove that which was necessary to achieve the ullage of
Yes.
30 feet or whatever it was on either side. Yes?
That's correct.
Right. And is it your case that they were never told that hundreds of barrels had been removed from the line?
They weren't.
Right, thank you.
The permit to work system incorporates 3 categories of approved documents: method statement, JHAs, and certificates. LMCS produced method statement and job hazard analysis to Paria for review and approval. These were provided by way of emails, the purpose being to execute the work safely. This review and approval process must be predicated on Paria's competence and expertise to effectively evaluate and scrutinize the contractor's proposed work method. This is a burden that Paria carries. Save for one clarification about the plugs, all was accepted and approved. That specific clarification dealt with the plugs, where Paria was informed that the methodology to be employed will be to remove them manually and to reinstall them to the top. There is no more clarity to this. And this brings me to the issue of the permit to work, 9320, which stated barriers to be used. Barriers to be used cannot and should not be equated to barrier to remain or barrier not to be removed. This is a convenient argument indeed, as the removal of the barrier was the Delta P event. In a safe system of work, however...
Pausing there, what do you say to the assertion that there should have been a separate permit to work for the removal of the barriers?
That was not the modus operandi that Paria had in terms of removal of the barriers.
Yes.
No, that was never the modus operandi that Paria had. In fact, the record will show that the permit to work that they have issued contains a number of various steps that has to be carried out.
So just so that I have it in my head,
yeah.
Your case is that no separate permit to work was required for the removal of the barriers.
No.
There are 2 work permits.
Yes.
The one from the 13th of February and the one on the 25th. Had the work not been interrupted by Mr. Guerra's untimely movement of the barge, would the works have been carried out under the original permit dated the 13th?
It would have been completed in the same manner.
Sorry?
It would have been completed in the same manner.
Yes, but there would have been no need for the permit that we have now been inspecting ad nauseum for the 25th.
No. No.
It simply wouldn't have arisen.
It would not have arisen.
Is it your case that it's still the position that they would not have required after the 13th of February's work permit, that they would not have required a further work permit to remove the barriers?
No, they would not have. That permit would cover the entirety of that.
Thank you.
In this safe system of work, however, there are checks and balances in place. Therein lies the importance of a toolbox meeting. What we have on this issue is Christopher Budram's evidence that the removal of plugs was discussed. And this is corroborated by the actions of the workers in the chamber. Missing as a check was Mr. Majhar Singh from this toolbox meeting, who, as it were, was the applicant for the works in relation to C line 36 on the 25th of February 2022. Claiming that monitoring of LMCS or any other contractor performing high-risk work periodically around 4 times per day is wholly unacceptable in the scheme of a safe work system. This is a system failure. Further, communication within the chamber while the men worked was established both by camera and radio. A simple request to perhaps adjust the view could have been made. It seems ludicrous that Paria can have paid, and what's more, it seems ludicrous that Paria can have paid personnel on site who was actually monitoring the works in the chamber out of curiosity, but couldn't do so as a matter of duty. This is a system failure of Paria.
Can I ask you about the toolbox meeting, please? Do you accept that the toolbox meeting, the note relating to that, falls woefully short of what it should have contained?
In relation to what was discussed?
Well, it deals only with health and safety issues, COVID,
yes,
bad weather, rising sea levels, things like that. It doesn't deal with the actual work that's to be undertaken at all.
Yes.
It says nothing about it at all.
It does, because...
It does or it doesn't?
It does, and...
What do you mean? It says what about the work?
It does fall short of what...
All right, sorry. I mean, we're at cross purposes. I thought you were trying to contradict what I was saying.
Yes.
You're not doing that. You're saying it does fall woefully short of what it should have contained.
Oh, of course it does. We acknowledge that. Unfortunately, and I have to stand here and say to you that the only reason for that was that the late Kazim Ali Jr., who would have been the person discussing the method statement and the work to be done within the chamber, and for that, on that day...
That was his job,
That
wasn't
was
it?
his job.
Right. He should have not only told them what the works, the nature of the work was, what the individual tasks to be completed was, but he should have recorded that on the toolbox meeting.
Yes.
And he failed to do that.
He failed to do that. The evidence from, I think, Mr. Victor Del Paul is that he was supposed to do that. He was going to do that, but he had not.
Now, I appreciate that there's been evidence to suggest that that did take place, but that the failing is simply failing to record it on the document. Whereas, of course, Paria's position is that it never took place at all.
Yes.
And, of course, they're supported in that submission by saying, well, the contemporaneous material that was available doesn't show that it was mentioned at all.
Well, in relation to there not being a contemporaneous documentation of what took place. But what we have is Mr. Budram's evidence as to his undeniable acceptance that...
No, of course we will have to assess whether we accept that or not.
Yes.
My concern is simply that the evidence without... The documentary evidence without the live evidence, as it were, would lend support to what Paria is saying, that there was no discussion at all about the works that were due to be carried out. In the absence of having Mr. Budram's evidence about that, we would be completely in the dark, wouldn't we?
Yes. Yes, we would have been. That is certainly true.
Yes. And given that you have made it part of your case, such as it is, to emphasize the importance of the dangerousness of this work, that is something which is, on any view, a significant shortcoming, isn't it?
It is.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if you'd like to have a short break now. I'm going on to the Delta P, and I don't know
Well,
if this is
I leave it in your hands. I mean, if you think you're about halfway through, then by all means we can take 5 minutes. If you think you're not quite there yet, let's go for a little bit longer, shall we?
We're about halfway through.
We are?
We are about
Well,
halfway.
if you want to take 5 minutes, then we will take 5 minutes.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, I don't, please. I will continue. I just wanted to know if there was any need for a break. Bye.
No, we'll take a 5-minute break now and come back, what should we say? Well, let's come back at 10 to 11, shall we? 10 to 11. Take a few minutes.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Before we move on, can I just ask you about the document which is in our core bundle, volume 3? Just give me a second. At page 1033. This is the, I don't know if it can be put up on the screen, but this is the document that is said to be the internal document that Paria produced for themselves as a sort of work instruction within their ambit, which, as we know, and I don't need to refer to it now, but it was referred to, it was passed on to LMCS by way of an email.
Yes.
It doesn't appear to have been inadvertent, rather more deliberate, whatever the position might be. It doesn't seem to have been, as it were, part of an email chain, and it happened to have been attached. Do you see what I mean? I don't think that they're suggesting that for a minute. But in any event, what is clear is that, and their case is that this is an internal document for them to be used by their people. Yes? This finds itself in your hands. What do you say about the receipt of this document and how that may or may not have affected the works for the removal of the material from the line?
In the work instructions, LMCS is required to follow the steps that would have been placed there. Whatever for the operational aspect of the line content removal. So in receiving that document, the process is within the LMCS side is that the persons operating from C line 36 would confer with Paria's personnel on the line content removal. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Well, I'm just looking at the wording of the actual section of the document itself. I don't know why it's not on the screen, but anyway. Responsibilities, it says the terminal operations manager, that's Mr. Piper, has the overall responsibility for ensuring that this procedure is established by reviewing and approving this work instruction and ensuring the offshore team lead understand the requirements of this work instruction. Now, pausing there for a moment, the scope of the work is described as clearing of the line between 5 and 6.
Yes.
Well, that is, to use one of my favorite expressions in this hearings, ambiguous, isn't it?
It is.
You see, if the line is to be cleared according to, if somebody reading that understood it to mean clearing it completely, that would lend support for why the volume of barrels were removed from the line.
And that certainly is a perspective as an attorney that I have taken. In my quest to investigate that with my client, his understanding of that instruction was that it's cleared only to the extent of the ullage to be.
So in a sense, if there is ambiguity, the fact that your client had this document would have been apparent to him that it wasn't clearing of the line completely. Do you follow what I mean? If this document had remained just in the hands of Paria, Paria might have been able to properly assert, well, whoever was reading it might have been able to properly assert, I thought that was the removal of the line completely, right? Because of the ambiguity in the way in which that's expressed. So that person might have just understood it in that way. But it wasn't just in their hands, it had come to you.
Yes.
And you knew that you weren't seeking to clear the line entirely. You were only looking for an ullage.
That's correct. But
so
we were
surely any ambiguity in that could have been easily set to one side by the knowledge that you say your clients had, which was that it was only to clear the necessary ullage.
That's correct. That is the operating factor that LMCS took.
Yes. So in one sense, having this in your hands doesn't help you at all, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
It does the exact reverse, because if there is ambiguity in that, you were in the best place, given it was your job to do to remove the material from the line. You were best placed to clear up such an ambiguity, weren't you?
Well, it's an instruction that was issued to LMCS. So
no. It's not an instruction that was issued to LMCS.
It's an instruction. It's an instruction that was issued by Paria.
It's an instruction issued by Paria to its people, to which you were privy. That is a different thing, isn't it?
Correct.
Yeah. To which you were privy. Now, I don't have any difficulty with you being privy to it.
Right.
It seems to me a very sensible idea that, well, look,
Correct.
this is what we've been told our people, this is what is in the document. But if the purpose of that at all is to just make sure that you understand what Paria are telling their own people, then if there is ambiguity in it, you were best placed to put paid to that, weren't you?
I would accept that. I would accept that would have been.
Yeah. Whereas if you'd never seen it, if it had never come into your hands at all, then you wouldn't have known that that's what it said. You wouldn't have known that there was any such ambiguity, would you?
No.
Right.
No.
But the fact is, you did.
But in the minds of the operators from LMCS, there was no ambiguity in what was required, and that's only in hindsight. Then we can appreciate the ambiguity that comes with it. But for the operators at the material time, no, it was not ambiguous at that point in time. Of course, it becomes the issue now, having regard to the fact of the delta P.
You see, some people might argue that it's not even ambiguous, that it's quite clear. Clearing of number 36 C line section between berth 5 and berth 6. To the ordinary mortal, one might think that that meant empty it.
Yeah. No, that was never the understanding.
No, I understand. That's not the understanding. I'm talking about reading the document. Yeah. And what I'm saying, or what I'm asking you, really, is what your position is on that, because it does seem to us that, be it clear or ambiguous, you were in the best place to make it clear that that is not what was being sought to be achieved.
I accept that, please, Mr. Commissioner.
All right. Yeah, well, thank you.
Operating in Delta P event. Operating in an environment of consistent systematic failure allowed for the Delta P event to have taken place. LMCS, in proceeding with the methodology to establish the desired ullage from which it assumed that there was a solid, when it was assumed that there was a solid leg of liquid or fluid behind the plug. However, Mr. Zayed Khan opined that the pressure at number 5 was locked in until the 25th of February 2022 and only released when the riser was opened to conduct the Cabot test. I will invite the Commission to consider that this opinion of the additional danger is not based on what actually occurred. Mr. Ali stated in his cross-examination, that the pressure was released from both ends of the pipe by the risers prior to the ullage measurements, and that will be found between pages 53 to 61 of the transcripts for the. That's right. that the pressure was released. The term he used was bleed out from both ends of the pipe.
Sorry, on which day?
That would have been on the... I'll take you through it, please, Mr. Commissioner. At Paria's daily report sheet, page 7288, line 1, it shows that the line content removal was completed on the 5th of February 2022. And thereafter, the daily report sheets at page 7291 and 7292 of the bundle of submissions show that for the 10th and 11th of February, the piping at the top of the riser was removed at berth 5, and the line plugs were installed and a new flange weld and a riser was constructed at berth number 5. The line plugs were then removed and the blind flange replaced on a newly installed flange. Paria reports show that the line plug were then installed on the 13th of February at berth number 6. So the impression created by the expert, or the impression that the expert had that the plugs were installed almost instantaneously on achieving the ullage, and thereby stopping or pressurizing the line at berth 5 with the blanking at the riser would not be true.
Well, they were blowing fuel out of the pipe over a number of days. Which days were they?
That started, I believe it was from the 4th or 5th of January, sometime in January, and it was completed on the 5th of February of 2022.
Right. And was it left? Are you saying it was left open?
It was so, and then works were then done at the berth number 5 on the riser of the top of berth number 5. So the statement that the opinion, that by blanking the removal of the blank on the 25th was the first time that the pressurization of that pipe was released or removed is incorrect when the carbon test was being done on the day of the 25th of February.
Well, whatever days it was that the pumping of the material from the pipeline were done, whatever days it was, we know as a matter of fact that there was a carbon test carried out at berth 5
That's correct.
on the 25th.
That's correct.
And in order to carry out that carbon test, you're saying the evidence is that the blind flange is removed?
Yes, it was removed on that day.
Right, so the blind flange at
berth 5.
At 5 is removed. Therefore, any differential in pressure that might have existed in the line at that stage would have been equalized. Is that your position?
No, not at all. I'm just correcting for the purposes of the credibility of Mr. Kazim Ali in relation to what he said before the commission. His evidence was that the line was bled out, and what we do, and the opinion given by Mr. Khan gives the impression that his evidence is incorrect or false or misleading, which lends to the issue of his credibility, no doubt. But that's not true. It seems to be that opinion was based on an assumption and not, in fact, what happened. And that is why I take the commission through the actual
sequence
series
of
events.
So the blind flange at 5 is removed in order to perform the carbon test?
Yes, it was. Yes.
And then refitted after the carbon test had been completed?
Yes, it was.
Before they come over to number 6?
Number 6, that's correct.
So whilst the work was being carried out at number 6, number 5 is open?
No, the carbon test, was done at berth number 5
Yes.
before it reached berth number 6.
I follow that, but they're working in the morning
Yes.
of the 25th at berth 6,
Yes.
and whilst that is happening, the lid, as I've called it before,
Sorry. They're working on what at berth 6?
they were working during the course of the morning at berth 6. That's the evidence.
That is the evidence.
Yes.
There was the exchange of the topside riser, I think.
They were working there. I
Yes, they
don't
were.
really care what they were
Yes.
particularly doing. I mean, all I'm concerned
Yeah.
about is the removal of the blood. But they were working for some hours at berth 6.
That's correct.
Now, is it what you're saying to me is that at berth 5, whilst they were doing that work at berth 6, at berth 5, they removed the flange,
Yes.
the lid as I call it, right?
The
They
lid,
removed
that's
the lid
correct.
at the top of the pipe, so the pipe comes up at 6, there's a lid on top, which is sealed. They then remove that in order to conduct the carber test on the inside. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
Right, and then they put the lid back on
And then
again.
they put the lid back on.
And then they went over
And then
to
they
number
went to
6.
Yes.
Right, okay. And the point about that is,
Well, it wasn't on the day in question that I'm talking about, but prior to the day in question, it seems as though from the expert that evidence or his opinion, about the pressurization of the line, that the removal of the flange on the 25th was the first time it was being removed after the insertion of the plugs at 6 on the 13th or 14th thereabout.
yeah,
At least that's my impression of the evidence that was, the opinion that was being given.
all right, so
So I take the opportunity to correct the record in relation to that.
all right. I'm not entirely sure what the consequence of that is.
Well, the evidence of Mr. Kazim Ali is corroborated by that fact, by the fact of what I have just laid out.
The sequence of events.
The sequence of
All right.
events.
So it's only really to
To point that out
point out that Mr. Kazim Ali is correct in what he says.
as to how it occurred.
Right.
Yes. Rescue.
All right, yes, thank you.
It is accepted that attempting to remove the inflatable plug created the delta P event, causing the men, tools, and breathing air to be sucked into the pipeline. Once the disturbed waters around the chamber settled and the chamber returned to normal function, Andrew Farrow, in 2 separate incursions, determined, 1, that the men were no longer in the chamber, nor were the tools, bolts, and diving gear. 2, the riser was full of water. And 3, there was no sign of content of the chamber in the immediate vicinity of the riser, on seabed, or floating around the surface surrounding the berth. This led to the conclusion that the men were in the pipe. After discussion with site personnel, Kazim Ali, Andrew Farrow, and Dexter Guerra decided that they had, at the least, minimum resources to do an incursion into the pipe. In addition to this on-site plan, Farrow called out Conrad and Conan Bedo for additional divers and equipment. Sometime within this time frame, Kazim Ali spoke with Colin Piper and who was told of his deduction. There was no indication of an ICT being activated. In fact, up until these hearings, LMCS never understood that Paria had activated an ICT. This only highlights further a systematic failure within Paria.
So you're saying they did not appreciate that an ICT was even in existence.
They did not. not in the structure of what the ICT should be.
Right. Until
These proceedings, please.
And you're specifically referring to Mr. Kazim Ali, are you?
Mr. Kazim Ali, Mr. Ahmed Ali, Mr. Dexter Guerra, LMCS.
Just a minute. Whose fault do you say that is?
The communication of the ICT commander.
Yeah, right. You say he just never made that clear?
No.
Mr. Piper?
Mr. Piper. Or any of his
Did you put
delegates.
that to him?
Pardon?
Did you put that to Mr. Piper? I do not recall you putting to Mr. Piper that he had never made it clear to Kazim Ali that there was an ICT
That's
of which
correct.
he was the head.
That's correct.
You should
never
have.
Yeah.
Quite a serious suggestion, isn't it? That part of your submissions now that the existence of the ICT was never made clear to Kazim Ali. You never put that to Mr. Piper when he gave his evidence.
Yeah, that's correct.
Sometimes it is said that the reason why counsel don't do that is because they never had instructions prior to that point in time, and that those instructions came later. Other times it's the fault of counsel overlooking a fact which they ought to have put.
Yes.
Which is it in this case?
It's the latter, please.
It's your fault.
Yes.
So I shouldn't hold it against Mr. Kazim Ali.
No,
I should
please.
hold it against you.
Yes.
All right. I will. Thank you.
The evidence elicited has shown that Paria prevented LMCS Limited from executing rescue plans that were continuously modified as more resources and information came to hand. The first denial to mount rescue attempts came around 3:30 p.m. when the permit to work was pulled and the countervailing instruction to cease, all diving, closed out work permit. Paria made the rescuers believe that the TTCG will be conducting a rescue when in fact there was no such determination until around 9 p.m. Paria had no plans or attempt at any rescue over the 25th, 26th, 27th of February. Paria was informed of proof of life within the pipeline by the very fact of Christopher's survival, and also by distress signals continuing up to and beyond 2:30 a.m. on Saturday, the 26th of February. Instead of acting on the proof
Do you accept that that is uncorroborated by anyone from Paria?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
And instead of acting on proof of life, Paria chose to discredit the knocking heard emanating from the pipe at number 5, saying it was noise from the equipment running and at berth 6, a distance of 1/4 mile away. After Christopher's life-saving heroics, Paria also chose to create the denial of the existence of the air pockets, saying that they were not seen on camera footage, even though Christopher Budram and 4 men survived for 3 hours with 5 tanks, which would have given them an hour to live if they each had the use of one. Mr. Piper claimed that he wanted more information from camera footage before considering any dive rescue. But his repeated requests up to 9 p.m. on Friday to the Coast Guard to do a dive does not support this claim. From the statement of Mr. Seals, it can be seen that the TTCG was requested again to consider a dive at 12:15 a.m. on the 26th of February. After the footage was received at midnight, Mr. Piper again asked the Coast Guard to dive and remove obstacles in the line, even though they had already told him that they were not trained for that and commercial divers would be more suitable. Mr. Piper ought to have known through Catherine Balkisoon that LMCS had experienced commercial divers on site, some related and some not related, who were prepared to dive, yet they were not asked. Colin Piper, Mushtaq Mohammed, Michael Way, and Randy Archibald all say that they got expert advice that they should not allow diving into the pipe. The experts listed were OSH, TTCG, OTSL, Hull, HHSL, EERS, Eastern Diving Services, Michelle Professional Diving Services. From this list, the evidence shows that the TTCG, EERS, and Michelle Professional Diving Services were only asked if they would conduct a rescue. They said they themselves would not perform a rescue, but never advised that a rescue should not be performed. Mr. Seals denies any involvement as an ICT member or an advisor to Paria. Mr. Piper advised all that Christopher Budram said the men did not make it. Then the other misleading information given was that there were dive bottles lodged in the line. The distance of that blockage location kept increasing in what seems to be an attempt to solicit a particular advice from the experts, or at least to deter a rescue plan being conducted or to justify not taking any action. Consider the evidence of Mr. Piper where he explained that the spooling of the ROV and the tether. We ask that the length of the tether, the top of the riser, and the slack of the tether must be considered in respect of the actual distance of where the location of that bottle was. There is a difference, it must be appreciated, between I am not prepared to send my men down the pipeline as it is too dangerous for them, and it is too risky to send divers into pipeline to rescue the men. The willingness of competent divers trained to undertake these risks with equipment and support for the execution of the plan was all that was needed. The first position seems to sit with all of the experts that Paria placed reliance upon, while the latter seems to be the position that Paria has taken.
What's the difference between send and allow?
That's correct.
Right.
It is of note that there is no evidence of the expert being asked to show experience or CV or any sort to Paria engage in them. In fact, it seems from the evidence that the experts weren't experts at all. In fact, diving into the pipeline is not a thing. Yet, there is evidence of Andrew Farah, Kazem Ali, Christopher Budram, and Michael Kurban diving into a pipeline. One point of agreement from both Mr. Donovan, Mr. Seals, and Mr. Fuentes seems to be that the very best way to advise on a rescue plan was to undertake a site visit or soliciting information from site personnel. In his witness statement, Mr. Piper made no mention of his fears of confined space rescuers dying whilst attempting to rescue people. Paria has its own confined space rescue protocol that could easily have been employed to formulate a rescue plan for the men in the pipe if they were serious. Mr. Piper spoke mainly of would-be rescuers rushing in to remove a victim without preparation, without breathing air, communication, and light. This incident happened at berth number 6 underwater and would negate any possibility of any rescuer impulsively rushing in without his own breathing gear, scuba, or surface supply. All plans considered by LMCS involve divers with air supply and underwater lighting, and initially rope for tethering and signaling, and later umbilical, in addition to rope that included camera lights and voice communications. This issue could have been easily dispelled with a hands-on approach with the divers on site, or at the very least through Catherine Balkisoon. Head first, feet first.
Sorry?
Head first, feet first.
Right.
LMCS always considered a feet first entry for rescue. This was what was discussed with Paria site personnel on Friday the 25th, and was the method actually executed by Michael Kurban. If Paria had any degree of interest in the rescue, then the de-risking of this methodology laid out by LMCS could have been explored with all on site through Catherine, or through a simple conferencing via her telephone to the ICT or those in charge. Time was passing along while workers reported hearing knocking noise. This was determined by varying knocking intensity and frequency. This was heard by LMCS people around 6:15, from about 6:15. And I'd refer to the evidence of Ms. Beverly Howe at page 465, paragraph 36. And that's in the bundles of
Well, I don't need an awful lot of persuading about there being a genuine knocking. If you're in that pipe looking for rescue and you're one of those persons, it's the most obvious thing to do, assuming you have something with which to knock. It may be that an argument can be made, well, nobody had anything that would resonate along a metal pipe. But we know that there were tanks, and we know there was tools and various other things in there. It seems likely that if you were looking for rescue, one of the few things that you could do would be to knock on the pipe.
Yes.
All right.
Paria, from their evidence, does not share this view, as I have said earlier. Their evidence is that they verified no knocking noises. But from the autopsy report, we know that there was life within the pipeline, and at the time that the knocking noises were being heard. Paria continued to prevent a rescue dive plan from berth number 6. LMCS's main goal on saving these men turned to the entry point at berth number 5, where the knocking noises were being heard. On being informed of the knocking noise and confirming same with their personnel, LMCS requested from Mr. Piper that the riser at berth number 6 be installed for the removal of the blind flange at the top of the riser at berth number 5, and to remove the chamber over the berth number 6. This would have allowed, at the very least, for an investigation of the system, and at best allow easier access into the riser for the purposes of rescue. Compressor failure was not the reason for the request of the riser installation. Mr. Piper himself confirms that LMCS possessed a backup compressor. The compressor in operation was functioning. LMCS, on being presented in real time, revisited rescues, an alternative to rescue. In this regard, the suggestion to remove the blank from berth number 5 was made to hopefully save the men from that end. However, to do so, the belief was that the riser being extended to atmospheric height would not interfere with the construct within the pipe, thereby allowing the blank to be removed from berth number 5 to conduct, as I said, at very least an investigation and at best to rescue the men. Eventually, Paria authorized the addition of the riser extension and the removal of the blank. However, the permission to remove the blank was withdrawn and not authorized until 5 a.m. on the 26th of February. Therefore, from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. on Saturday, there was no point of entry into Sea Line 36. This secured only one thing: prevention of any diver from accessing the pipeline. Removal of the chamber did not come until 9 p.m. on the 26th of February, and eventually it was removed over the top of the...
I can't hear you. You're letting your voice drop, and I can't hear you.
Sorry, my apologies. Removal of the chamber did not come until 9 p.m. on the 26th of February, and eventually it was removed from the top, from over riser top. Of course, installation of the riser only meant completion of the subsea works at riser 6. The issue of policing on site to control LMCS workers is a diversion of all efforts on the front for rescue. It takes away Paria from attending to whatever they were attended to, and the creation of distrust with LMCS. Had Catherine Balkisoon genuinely felt threatened by the workers' behavior, would she have continued to be in their presence on their barge? Mr. Ali's meeting to plead for rescue on Saturday was not treated with any seriousness or thought. Then the meetings on the 27th of February 2022 were clearly not for the benefit of, were clearly only for the benefit of indulging LMCS, as the decision to move from recovery was already made since Saturday night between Mr. Piper and Mr. Mohammed. In common parlance, it was a papi show. LMCS's participation in this inquiry has been channeled to...
Sorry to interrupt you there. Just before you move on to the next point. Do you accept that Mr. Kazim Ali might have made greater effort to communicate a plan to rescue these men on the night of the 25th?
That he could have?
Do you believe that he could have made a greater effort to communicate a dive plan to Mr. Piper, even if he didn't believe that there was an IMT or ICT, to Mr. Piper, knowing that Piper had blocked diving? Do you believe he might have made a better effort to communicate a dive plan to rescue these men on the night of the 25th?
I am thinking about the communication, as I understand it, between him and Mr. Piper.
Yes.
And I'm taking it within the context of LMCS also being on site.
Yes.
With the dive supervisor and divers present there. And the train of thought that LMCS possessed in relation to the site being the best place for the formulation of those plans. And my answer to that would be that it could have been done, but the best place to have done it was on the site to Catherine Balkisoon, who was in any event part and parcel of the team of persons who were deciding.
And is it your position that he did? Is it your position that he did communicate a dive plan to Catherine Balkisoon?
Yes, not Mr. Ali. Yes, he did. There was a conversation with Kazim Ali over the phone. I believe there is an evidence to that.
Yeah, but it's rather limited, isn't it?
Well, and that is the interrogation that should have occurred on site, at the very least, where you have persons presenting to you that we are willing, we have this plan to go down and dive. You may not like, you may think that it's mutterings, but you may not like it. But it was prudent for you at that moment to investigate it, because this is a rescue mission. And if not for anything, every possible and conceivable option should be exhausted.
And whose fault was it for not doing that?
For not interrogating it?
For not looking at each or exhausting every possibility?
It would have been Paria's position, Paria's default in that.
Right.
They had the option of investigating, interrogating what was on site.
Right. Well, Kazim Ali wasn't on the site the whole time, was he?
No, he was not.
Right. So he was at a place where, even if it were thought to be unreasonable to ask for a dive plan, even if it were thought to be unreasonable to ask for an emergency response, some sort of job analysis,
Something
even
in
if it
writing.
were thought all of that was unreasonable, he was he not, in a position, because he wasn't on site, to have typed up his best plan that he could come up with and give it to them, couldn't he?
I
Albeit in very truncated form, bullet points, if you like, rather than a detailed narrative.
Certainly, if he had known that that was a requirement, he could have produced that. I'm sure he would have had that.
You're saying he didn't know?
He didn't know that that is what they were requiring. That was never communicated to LMCS. The only time that a request was made for a plan in writing was after the meeting on the morning of Sunday, 27th of February.
You remember the evidence of Mr. Piper that he made a number of attempts to speak to Mr. Kazim Ali during the course of the inquiry, not always answering for no doubt good reasons. But Mr. Kazim Ali understood that there was a bar on diving having been placed there by Mr. Piper.
Yes.
In order to effect a rescue, if he was to effect a rescue, would it not have been prudent, at the very least, for him to have spoken to Mr. Piper to say, look, this is the plan that I have to rescue these men, lift the bar?
Analyzing what has occurred, or what we know to have occurred, it is the most prudent thing that ought to have been done. The issue is the conversation between Mr. Piper and Mr. Ali and what they had actually in fact discussed and how they discussed proceeding.
Well, all we've got is what they each say about it.
Yes.
All right. Yes, I'm reminded that they knew each other quite well personally.
Yes. They do.
So it's not as though you're dealing with some corporate, faceless individual. These were two men who knew each other in the industry over many years.
Certainly.
Should have made it easier, shouldn't it?
It should have, but from Mr. Piper's evidence itself, his disposition had always been that LMCS were too emotional. And the question now becomes whether or not there was anything that was being said by Kazim Ali that was taken into account. Because all of Saturday morning, this is going into the next day, Mr. Ali sat trying to explain and to get cooperation.
I'm much more interested, if I may say so, on the Friday night, because it won't have come as any surprise to you that I take the view at the moment that it was highly unlikely that was anybody going to be alive on the Saturday, and that the action needed to take place on the Friday night, not Saturday.
Yeah, certainly. But what I'm drawing to you, Mr. Chairman, is the attitude with which Mr. Ali was treated by Paria, by the personnel. Their disposition was that he was an emotional person, and they did not pay heed to him. That much is clear.
Well, his son was in the pipe. Of course he was emotional.
They did not pay heed to him after the 25th, and one can only extrapolate that they did not pay any heed to him on the night of the 25th.
Okay. All right. That's your submission anyway. Yeah.
That. LMCS participation in this inquiry has been channeled to ensure that it delivers all that it knows. However, LMCS itself possessed no strategy of conjuring or redesigning what actually took place. However, what has become clear from the live evidence elicited in these proceedings, there are three categories, distinct categories of information to be considered. What was, what could have been, and what should have been. These are not proceedings confined to pleadings, and as this commission will retire to deliberate on the evidence from the various documents, statements, and viva voce evidence, I wish to volunteer to the commission that should there be the need to seek any clarification in any aspect for which LMCS may be able to assist, we stand ready. I know that, Mr. Commissioner, this brings me to the end of my closing. I know that, Mr. Commissioner, you've asked us to consider whether there be any recommendations that we wish to put forward. From the evidence that has been or is before this commission, what is clear is that from the design of the scope of work to the ineptitude of the emergency response and the lack of consideration of the families by Paria, there is a systematic failure within that institution. Of course, whilst I have not been able to coach a recommendation in the parameters of a term, I would like to commend to you, Mr. Chairman, and to Mr. Commissioner, the need to recommend or the need to consider some form of an internal audit system that could or ought to address the coordinated functions within Paria. It seems to be that that system is in a dire want of coordination. And that's a danger not just, as we've seen here, to LMCS, but it's a danger to all contractors working in Paria and who continue to provide services that may be high risk. I have been asked for the Commission to consider standards for dive that can be implemented in a manner that bridges not just the institution and the performance of work, but the training, the requisite standards of the training facilities that are present in Trinidad.
Training facilities in what area?
For diving on a general. It seems from the evidence or from what we've observed in this hearing that there is need to standardize or to at least have proper accreditations, etc., to what training there is to divers in this jurisdiction.
Mr. Chetty was offering some training. All right. Anything else?
Unless I may be of any further assistance.
No, well, yes, to this extent, please. Having heard the evidence, as you have, you've been here every day, in the course of this inquiry, do you believe, or is it your submission, I should say, that scuba should not have been used for this hazardous work?
No.
It's not your submission,
no,
or it should not have been used?
No, That's not my submission.
Right.
That it should not have been used. From my understanding of the evidence and what we have, the scuba should have been used. It was merely to access the chamber. It would have been safe, I believe, from what I have heard and been able to assess that had they have that helmet that was brought to this commission, the dangers and the risk associated with that is just adding and mounting to what already exists.
I don't think anyone's suggesting that the helmet that Mr. Wilson brought along would have been ideal for the works that needed to be done.
Yeah.
I shudder to think of the strength of Mr. Wilson's neck in order to hold such a helmet. But we've heard a good deal of evidence about the desirability of using scuba equipment in an environment such as this particular one, given the hazardous nature of the work and so on. And I haven't concluded a view yet, but it does seem to me that having an umbilical attached to you whilst you carry out that work, being tethered whilst you carry out that work, has some merit.
It does. I agree.
And perhaps, had that happened, perhaps they might not have died. I'm not saying I've formed a view about it, because I do accept that really all you were doing was to get into the habitat, and that a tether might have been provided within the habitat in any event, whether you were using scuba equipment or not. But anyway, your position is that scuba equipment, in order to carry out those works, was perfectly acceptable.
I believe so.
That's what you're saying?
I believe so.
All right. Thank you. That's all I needed to ask you.
Mr. Chairman, but before I finish, if I may have just a moment, I follow in my friends from yesterday footstep of thanking the Commission and thanking all of my colleagues present here, but as a remit from LMCS as well, being that these are public hearings, I would like to say in a public forum, at this forum, that LMCS wishes to thank all of the volunteers who would have presented themselves in order to lend the necessary help and assistance as they could have on that night and continuing.
Yes. Yes, well, thank you very much for that. All right. We're going to take our break now, a little bit earlier than we planned, but can I suggest then that we're 11:45 now. Mr. Peterson, what is the plan from your team?
We were anticipating that to take a short break now. We start at 12, possibly break at 1 for lunch, and then resume and do the next hour.
Well, I'm content with that course, if that suits you.
Yes, that suits us.
Let us have 15 minutes now. We'll
Yes.
start at 12 o'clock. Who's going to address me?
I am going to, sir. Sorry to force that on you. Yes, sir.
Throughout. For the whole 2 hours.
You sound like you would like to hear Mr. Mutu also, sir. Yes, sir.
I was rather looking forward to Mr. Mutu, but never mind. So you'll address us for an hour now, or shortly, and then we'll have our lunch break, and then we'll come back, and that will conclude the proceedings today. Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. We'll do that. We'll resume at 12 o'clock, please.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and fellow Commissioner. These submissions, Mr. Chairman, are made by Paria Fuel Trading Company, Paria, and Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, Heritage, in these circumstances where they have not been called upon to answer any specific or general allegation of wrongdoing against them in relation to the events of this inquiry. But we recognize that the Commission has indicated that the well-known procedure in relation to the issuance of Salmon letters, should that become necessary, will be forwarded in due course before the delivery of your final report. Accordingly, sir, the submissions which follow are necessarily to be treated as provisional in the nature and subject to amplification should the need arise after receipt of the letters. So Paria and Heritage, sir, wish to reserve the right to add to or modify these statements and submissions if necessary.
You have my absolute assurance that that will be the position.
Thank you, sir.
If salmon letters are issued, I will expect, obviously,
yes,
comprehensive responses.
Yes, sir. As mentioned in our opening statement of this inquiry is largely concerned with an examination into the circumstances which led to the loss and unfortunate event of the death of 4 employees of LMCS Limited. Those persons are Kazim Ali Jr., Rishi Nagasa, Yusuf Henry, and Fazal Kurban. The loss is not measurable for these families. It's significant, and we recognize that it would be less of human of us not to do so. But the events of the 25th of February 2022, while these men were in the process of undertaking work as employees of LMCS on the sea line riser at Paria, led to their death. There is no truly compensatory measure that could be done to these families. The loss of their loved ones is irreplaceable. Paria and Heritage appreciate that to assist in bringing closure to these persons in an effort to avoid the recurrence of this event of the 25th, that they fully participated and they did not hold back with the greatest of respect in any way in assisting this commission, because they recognize that this event should not reoccur. To this end, Paria and Heritage have voluntarily made available to the Commission all such persons in their respective employ that they consider to be relevant and helpful to this Commission, even as a continuing obligation, which resulted in what Chairman described as a dumping of material. Our advice was, we need to dump it. We can't hold it back once we discover it or once it's requested. So we apologize for the inconvenience caused, but we are grateful for the day off on that occasion.
One sec.
Who said that? Siri heard me, sir.
All right.
She likes my voice. Could you turn that off?
One of your fan club?
No, Siri, my phone. While some may take the view that Paria should have handled matters differently, and although there may well be room for some divergence of views on that, as Paria should or should not have done in relation to LMCS, as retaining LMCS to carry out the work, the execution of the works up to and including the 25th of February 2022, and the rescue and recovery efforts at the end of the day taken by Paria were entirely reasonable in light of a range of options that were open to it. For the reasons which follow, we respectfully submit that there is no reasonable basis for Paria to be faulted or to bear any liability in relation to 1. Its selection of LMCS as a contractor to undertake the works. the role played by and during the execution of the works, having regard to other things such as the fact that Paria did not possess the capabilities to execute such works. Also, the fact that it took reasonable steps to satisfy itself that the independent contractor it ultimately hired for the works, namely LMCS, was a competent and well-established specialist contractor operating in the oil and gas sector with the requisite knowledge, skill, and experience in successfully executing works of a similar nature. I could not help but observe counsel for LMCS this morning seek to paint LMCS as not being a specialist contractor. I don't think that that could be sustained. The contractual arrangements ultimately entered into between Paria and LMCS followed a competitive tendering process. The information and the specialist advice provided to it by LMCS prior to and during the course of executing of the works and its decision and the actions of touching and concerning the rescue and recovery efforts took place between February 25th and March 4th, 2022. Paria was assessed and accepted to be competent to do the work. LMCS. I now turn to the works. In summary, the works for which LMCS was contractually engaged by Paria following the competitive process of tendering, 3 separate categories of works were identified to be executed. LMCS was required to change. First, LMCS was required to change out a section of subsea riser and tie in piping on sea line number 36 at berth 5 and berth 6. Second, LMCS was required to remove, service and repair and reinstall marker buoys and storm mooring buoys located at the Point-à-Pied Harbour. The third category of work was that LMCS was required to fabricate and replace 300 feet of main walkway on Paria's main viaduct at Point-à-Pied Harbour. The matters which occupy this inquiry pertains to the first set of works with respect to the change out of the section of the subsea riser between berth 5 and berth 6. The tender process, in an effort to attract suitably qualified contractors, went out, and 27 contractors who were pre-qualified in relation to marine installation maintenance responded to that invitation. Paragraph 7 to paragraph 18 of the witness statement of Rajendra Mehas has set out the procedure for the pre-qualification of contractors. And I just flagged that for your consideration, Commissioners.
Do you have a page number for that?
No, paragraph 7 to 18 of Mr. Mehas' statement dated the 12th of September 2022.
All right.
And also, you could find paragraph 26 of the statement of Manmohan Balkaran. His statement is dated the 30th of September 2022. The tender process was engaged by Paria for a period of approximately 1 month, from the 29th of April to the 28th of May 2021. On the 4th of May 2021, a mandatory virtual site visit for bidders was attended by 16 vendors. And then there was a scheduled in-person visit, but that had to be aborted due to the advent of COVID-19. 5 bids were received during the period prescribed for the submission of bids. LMCS was the only bidder that provided all documents required by Paria's scope of works. and therefore the only bidder which provided the valid, what we can describe as a valid technical bid. And this can be seen at paragraphs 26 to 29 of the witness statement of Mr. Manmohan Balkaran. The technical specifications for the works with which bidders were required to comply provided, among other things, the following. That the bidders were required to demonstrate that they possessed the experience and resources, both equipment and personnel, and also technical capability to successfully complete the works. Bids would only be considered if they were validly submitted. Among other things, they were to be store certified, or there should be store certification of the entity, a audited HSE management system for high-risk offshore services, inclusive of drilling services, diving services, lifting services, piling works, pipeline construction and repairs, an HSE plan, a quality assurance plan, method statement, an overarching risk assessment and dive plan. They also needed to provide resumes of key personnel and their experience in similar projects.
Can I ask you about that? Given that Paria are a national company dealing with the distribution of oil and other hydrocarbons, put out a tender for this kind of work, which was not an insignificant amount of work to be done, at no doubt considerable cost. Does it come to you as a surprise that there was only one bidder who was compliant in the whole of this country?
No, sir, not really. Because of the nature of the work, it narrows down the persons available to do that work.
Yes.
Because of the specialized nature of the work, again, a narrowing factor. So the pool will then get very small. And the fact that we also had COVID with respect to persons being available, and a lot of companies may not be operational or fully operational at the time, and may not, because you may recall the evidence of Mr. Donowa, that I think it may be in a statement, I don't know if he said it live, that due to COVID, they had at one point 100 and something staff, and I think they shrunk down to a certain number.
Yes.
So that may have accounted
Well,
for
I'm sure that's affected a lot of people and a lot of business. So you think probably
that may have accounted
probably more to do with the COVID
Yes.
outbreak than anything else.
Yes, sir. That may have accounted for the
Yes. All right, thank
small number of responders. Paria, in the course of assessing the bids, checked LMCS's references by calling persons, entities, names to verify the materials and services that were successfully provided, and references that were successfully provided by LMCS to Paria. Further, the Petrotrin database disclosed that during the period 2015 to 2018, LMCS carried out 124 jobs for Petrotrin and obtained a rating of acceptable for each job, with the only other available rating as unacceptable. So it was either acceptable or unacceptable. And they did 124 and they got acceptable rating. Previous jobs undertaken by LMCS for Petrotrin included, but were not limited to, rerouting of sea line risers, structural repairs to berth, renewal of piping and renewal of risers. I cite paragraphs 12 to paragraph 17 of the witness statement of Mr. Rajendra Mehes, dated September 12, 2022. In addition to that, sirs, in the year 2020, LMCS successfully completed subsea maintenance works at berth number 5 of almost identical nature to to those in respect of which Paria had invited them to tender. And this could be supported also from the statement of Mr. Kazimali Sr. at paragraphs 16 and 17 of the supplemental statement bundle, where Mr. Ali detailed in that statement that the job was so similar that inflatable plugs was also used, and I think he used the phrase, same techniques were used. So paragraphs 16 and 17 of Mr. Kazimali Sr.'s statement. I am reminded that the performance on that job was rated as excellent. Indeed, those 2020 works involved the replacement of an old riser with a new riser with the aid of a hyperbaric chamber, and required the installation of migration barriers at a subsea level.
Do we know if there was any fluid in the line before the works were carried out?
I don't, sir, and that's why we were trying to track the documents. But
yeah,
as we said, as the documents contain on themselves, they have a destruction clause that allows them to be destroyed within 3 months of completion of the works unless there are outstanding issues.
I just wondered if there was any actual evidence from somebody about whether or not there was anything in the line. Sorry?
He said he might have seen something that
yes.
would help us.
All right. Well, of course, I'd be.
That would be helpful too, sir, if it's quite a similarity or lack thereof, as the case may be.
Yeah, I was particularly interested in whether they were sucking or blowing
Yeah,
in order to get the
But there was air blowing. So that I heard the question you posed to Council for LMCS, and that is we did find something that accounted, because that, I will be very candid, that's a point that Mr. Mutu and I have been debating about. When did that shift take place from pumping to air blowing? Because that seems to have, based on all the evidence, including the experts, to have had some impact or some contributory impact to the events of that day.
Indeed.
And we found something that may point us in the direction as to when that change would have, that shift would have taken place.
Yes, I think we've got something on that as well. But yeah,
you all got something. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. 16. Yes, you will find it. Accordingly, so it cannot be doubted that at the time of tender, LMCS objectively presented as a specialist contractor that was well qualified and experienced to execute the works in question. I don't think, I can't recall any evidence in this inquiry challenging their ability to execute the works of this nature. Paria notes that during the course of this inquiry, suggestions have been made to the effect that it ought to have had adequate internal resources with the relevant skill and experience to rigorously evaluate all of the technical aspects of the bids received, inclusive of the method statement, the risk assessment, and the emergency response plan, or that it should have retained an external consultant capable of so doing. While these are not unreasonable views, the reality is that the law did not impose such a requirement on Paria. Legally speaking, all that Paria was required to do was to take reasonable steps to satisfy itself that the independent contractor retained by it to carry out the works had the requisite level of competence. Applying this legal standard, it could hardly be suggested that Paria was negligent in the selection of LMCS as a contractor, given LMCS's knowledge, extensive experience, STO certification, and track record in executing works of a similar nature similar to those that Paria was seeking to invite the bids. In any event, there is nothing contained in LMCS's method statement that accompanied its bid which, if adhered to, would have given rise to the Delta P event or to the risk of such an event reasonably occurring. In this connection, the following evidence is of critical importance. From it.
I've seen in front of that fluid was in line and some are very clear when you read these two paragraphs.
Mr. Chairman, before I go on to the evidence that showed that I'm about to deal with respect to the Delta P event, with respect to LMCS, I wanted to go back to answering the question you asked, Mr. Chairman, as to whether in the previous job there was any indication as to whether the line had content.
Yes.
The same paragraph 16 of the statement of Kazim Ali Sr. of the supplemental bundle, statement dated the 22nd of November, no, the 8th of November 2022, paragraph 16 and 17.
Yeah.
When you read the two statements, the two paragraphs together, so it catered for, exactly, yeah. It's catered for the utilization of the plugs, the barriers to stop hydrocarbon vapors, and the fact that he said that the technique that were employed is similar to the techniques to be employed in 2022. I think one can read and infer to that the same steps: the clearing of the line, the insertion of the plugs, the removing of the riser.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I mean, it does seem to me of some importance, and we don't have the documents because they've been destroyed, but it does seem to me to be of some importance to know whether the line was cleared, firstly by them, secondly by pumping or blowing, and thirdly, what quantity might have been taken out of the pipeline at the time, things of that kind. Yeah. So that a direct comparison could have been made. I think you're right. We can infer that it was a similar job. Exactly what happened, though, couldn't have been the same. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been here to have done the second job.
It doesn't condescend to
that detail.
Yes.
No, quite. All right. Well, thank you for that. Yes. Anyway.
The evidence I say, sir, that would have removed the risk of a Delta P is as follows. A, LMCS's method statement at tender expressly provided that the liquid content from C line 36 was to be removed to a level sufficient to allow the replacement of the corroded section, and once the level in the riser had dropped to 35 feet below sea level, a line plug would be installed. So it recognized a clearing of the line to the point of 35 feet below. And that could be found at page 659 of the core bundle of documents. Secondly, LMCS HSE manager, Mr. Ahmad Ali, testified that its method statement required that LMCS only remove enough line content sufficient to give it room to install the plugs, while leaving the rest of the contents in the line, and that such removal would not have created a void in the line, providing enough space for something to suck anyone in. See paragraphs 13 of the supplemental statement of Mr. Ahmed Ali, dated the 31st of October 2022. Third, LMCS Managing Director Mr. Kazim Ali Sr. testified that LMCS did not propose the removal of the entire line contents between berth 5 and 6. He said that is so because it wanted to set the plug on a solid leg of liquid, and that LMCS did not mention delta P in its discussions in the method statement or risk assessment because delta P was to be taken care of by ensuring that there would have been no pressure difference across the plugs. See paragraph 26 of the supplemental witness statement of Mr. Ali, dated the 22nd of November, 2022. The fourth piece of evidence is that LMCS Managing Director Mr. Kazim Ali Sr. also testified that he was of the impression that Paria understood that the method for the removal of liquid only required the creation of a 35-foot space to set the plug, and that he did not think that Paria wanted LMCS to clear the entire line. See paragraphs 33 and 36 of the supplemental witness statement of Mr. Ali. Both LMCS and Paria interpreted and subsequently treated both LMCS method statement insofar as it pertains to the removal of the liquid content of the line, and Paria's response to the query 1 in the addendum 1. Addendum 1 is at page 598 of the core bundle, which referred to the ensuring that the line is clear and dry. That phrase that had consumed a considerable time of this commission as to what is meant by the term clear and dry. Both LMCS and Paria understood what that meant. Mr. Chairman, at several points in this inquiry, Mr. Chairman made the point, and Commissioner Wilson, that it's vague, or it's vague when one reads it, because it does not say that all the content was not to be removed, and they put it to several witnesses what they understood by clear and dry. My respectful view, sir, is that that phrase has to be taken in the context of the contract. It has to be taken in the context of the industry. And it has to be taken in the context, because since we are inquiring into the events of the 25th, it has to be taken against the backdrop of what the contracting, acting parties understood by that phrase. And my respectful submission is neither Paria nor LMCS accepted that phrase as clearing the line completely of all contents. They understood it.
Yeah. Do you agree, though, that to us,
yes,
looking at it with the benefit of hindsight, obviously just reading the documentation, the combination of that addendum in which the response from Paria is the contractor is responsible for the safe removal of hydrocarbon contents from the line and to ensure that the line is clear and dry,
yes,
that combined with the internal instruction at Paria that the clearing of sea line 36 section between berth and 5 and 6, that the clearing of that line and the clear and dry suggests to us that would have been emptying the line.
Yes, sir. I don't want to say the uninitiated, but...
Well, we are uninitiated, yes, aren't we? Yes.
We would read it literally as meaning clear and dry, clean it out, dry it out.
Yes.
But I think it was the evidence of Mr. Michael Wee and also from Kazim Ali that they understood, well, I think Mr. Wee said he understood it to mean the area to be worked on is to be clear and dry in order to effect the works.
Right.
But so when you look at it, with respect, it boils down to no troubling moment in that even the evidence of Mr. Zaid Khan once the ullage was checked, and whether it was 30 feet, 35 feet, there was ullage. Inherent in that is that there was content in the line. So once it was understood that the aim of the exercise or the mission was to achieve an ullage of 30 or 35 feet, and everyone was moving towards achieving that, whether they had got it false reading and all of that later on is a different issue. But once the mission was always to achieve an ullage of 35 feet, inherent in that is the presence of content.
Yes.
So no one understood this phrase, notwithstanding how clear it is linguistically.
Yes.
No one read it and applied it to mean clear and dry as we accept the uninitiated would have thought it was.
Ignore it. Yes, but do you accept that it was only Paria who had the information as to actually how much was removed from the line?
Well, yes, sir, that is, well, because it went into Paria's tanks and facilities.
Yes.
But of course, that has its own challenges if you were to rely on that, because as Mr. Kazimali admitted, there was commingling of product because it joins other lines, one. And also, I don't think if parties, and I was discussing that with Mr. Mutu this morning, if parties were item with respect to seeking an ullage of 35 feet, I don't think it mattered. And I don't think anybody would really be monitoring quantum. Because it's not like if they're selling it to a third party.
It's self-evident they could not have been monitoring. I mean, the people who were actually concerned with getting the line to where it should be, they could not have been concerned with quantum, because had they been, they would have realised that there's far too much being taken out of the line.
Exactly, sir.
There's no question about that. But what I'm concerned about is that, firstly, the only people who knew how much was being taken out of the line, within certain limitations, because there were whole days where nothing was recorded, even though there was blowing taking place. And so there was an unknown quantity removed from the line. But leaving aside that for the moment, on any view, hundreds of barrels of oil were removed from the line. We know that to be a fact because this would not have happened without it.
Yes,
right?
that's a fact.
What I want to try and understand is that it is only Paria's knowledge, it was only within Paria's knowledge as to how many barrels were removed, wasn't it?
Well, it was available to Paria if one was focusing on that. So to answer your question, it was going into Paria's onshore facility.
Yep.
And if one was required to monitor that or to focus on it, they would have picked that up. But I think, sir, in trying to determine at this commission what happened on that day, I think we have to look at things in the context. What was the focus point of those works? The focus point, the mission we're on, is to get ullage down to 30 or 35 feet.
Sure, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that.
If there was a corresponding default check and persons were put to monitor that, then one could have picked up, based on the quantity here, something is wrong there. But to be fair to all parties on that day, if even they check there and they see a certain quantity and they may be alarmed, when they check the ullage, not knowing then what we know now, and they see 35 feet, I could see one just dismissing that because it's not been sold to third party, it's not been dumped in the sea, it's in our tank, but we got the main mission we're seeking, 35 feet ullage, we got it here. Let's insert the plugs and get on with the job.
But is that really a tenable argument, Mr. Peterson? If somebody had looked at the amount that was being pumped out of that line, we're not talking about some modest discrepancy in the terms of the number of barrels that was necessary to achieve that ullage. We're not talking about that. Potentially by 1,000%. I mean,
so I hear that and I understand
hundreds
that.
and hundreds of barrels were removed from the line. I find it difficult to believe that people working in the industry for years, the people that Paria employed, experience in that industry, people that LMCS employed in their experience in the industry, that they would not have been alarmed at the sheer volume of material that was removed from that line in order to seek to achieve an ullage of just 35.
That's what I'm saying, sir.
The fact that they didn't do it is something we have to consider in due course as to a double check, if you like, for the future. That if you're seeking to establish an ullage on either side in order to remove a piece of pipeline, that you're in a position to be able to, on the one hand, have a dip down your pipe to see where the fluid ends, and then corroborate that so as to avoid this situation developing by looking at actually what was removed from the line.
Yes, sir.
As I've put it rather blithely on a number of occasions, you could have stuck a bucket down there and removed enough to get 35 feet.
I understand the concern you have, sir, but that presupposes a correlation between the clearing of the line, the operations clearing the lines, and people back at storage that may possibly, I want to say, to use the term, lend their tanks, their storage. So they're managing storage, they have the tanks, they lending the storage, let's say, but they are not part of that repair and operation.
No, clearly not.
Had there been a correlation between that,
yes,
then one would have said, but look how many barrels we get in here. LMCS, you're telling me 35 feet ullage, but look, 500 barrels or whatever.
What's the position about this internal document that is essentially for Paria's own staff, right, in order to carry out this clearing of the line?
Beg your pardon, sir?
The document that we have at 1033. Yes. This is the clearing of section of the line, the work instruction, which was the internal document.
Yes,
yes? If that is an internal document, would that not have gone also to the people who are monitoring the tanks?
No, sir, I understand this to be an internal document for the operations at line 36. So they say, so and that is how, and I could see, although it was not intended for LMCS, but I could see it getting into their hands. I could see no harm by that. But what it was setting out is a step-by-step procedure as to what was happening with the procedure. Yeah. So there's the following the steps for the clearing of the line. Now, if there was a correlation between all the parties.
Just pause for a minute. Have you got the document in front of you?
Yes, sir.
Right. Would you look to page 1034, please?
Which one is 1034?
1034. I don't know if it's possible to bring it up on the screen. It's page 2 of the document.
Page 2.
Do you have that?
Yes, sir.
Do you see it says, I mean, this is under the subheading preparation for installation of slip blank. Right.
Yes.
And then it gives, as a prerequisite, this is the step-by-step guide to what should happen, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
And just taking by way of example, the 13th step in that is monitor tank 111 levels and gauge pressure. What's tank 111?
I understand that to be an onshore tank.
Right, where the fluid is coming into.
Yes, sir.
Right? So monitoring that tank, its levels, and the gauge pressure, and gauge the pressure, right? Now, forgive me, but if that is meant to be one of the steps,
so I understand.
Somebody must be looking at that, and there has to be a purpose for doing that.
Yes, sir.
And that purpose must relate, surely, to the amount of material that's taken out of the line.
So I saw this and I did not read it that way. It will give an indication as what is taken out of the line.
Yeah.
But remember, the person who may be monitoring the tank is monitoring the tank in the event of overflow to switch it to possibly tank 1112 or 1113.
Right. You mean just the few barrels that was necessary to be removed from this line, he might have to switch between these enormous tanks for those few barrels to be, so that it doesn't overflow. And
so you hit the nail on the head. But that is the problem. No, that's the problem with the issue. So when one's seeking to use the actual amount that came out against Paria, because
I'm not using it against anyone. I just want. I mean, it just seems to me a failure all round that nobody seemed to understand what I would have regarded as basic mathematics. In order to achieve the ullage that you're looking for, you need this number of barrels removed. If you take hundreds and hundreds more than that, something has gone wrong. Anyway.
Yes, sir. But the point is, sir, that Remember that the 1-1, that is presupposing, sir, that 111, tank 111, is dedicated solely for that purpose, and that's the point I'm making.
No.
There was no connection between the works going on at 36 and the utilization of the storage. It's almost like if the project is borrowing storage in the meantime, because they had to repump. They had to put back fuel when they finish.
Yes.
And,
yeah.
because there was no obligation at the clearing on Paria to monitor the amount of fuel being taken out, and that is probably what led to the excess taken out.
Cutting through all of that, do you agree that had someone been monitoring that, the alarm bells might have been rung?
Alarm bell might have been wrong, but I factor into that there was I call it commingling, that, as Mr. Ali also agreed with the term, because tanks could be fed from different sources.
Yes, but is it really to be suggested that at the same time as they were pumping oil from sea line 36 into tank number 111 and monitoring the levels, that there might have been fuel coming from some other source?
I'm subject to correction, but I think the lines are interconnected. That's the thing.
No, I follow they're all interconnected, but I'm assuming, perhaps wrongly, because I don't know anything about this, that they would close off valves leading into that line that would take it into tank 111 and just measure what was actually being taken out of sea line 36. And Mr. Wilson suggests that there would be a manifold to do so.
I was just reminded of some of the evidence that when you blow at 36, it moves into 66, and it moves the product in 66 further ahead. So that's what I'm saying. So unless there was a dedicated assignment of monitoring, it may have raised an alarm bell as well as it may not have.
But isn't that what this is? This is your document. This is the internal document for Paria for the works to be, as it were, monitored. All right. This is what you describe. Your document describes clearing of sea line 36 between burst 4, between 5 and 6, and it's described as the work instruction from the terminal operations to offshore. And one of the, as it says, procedure, the following are the steps that should be followed for the clearing of the sea line between 5 and 6. Step number 13, or rather step number 12, open tank 111 valve to receive line content of 66.
Of 666 sea line, yeah.
Yes, and then it says monitor tank 111 and levels and gauge pressure. But surely the purpose for doing that is so that you know how much has come out of 66.
I don't think so, sir.
You don't?
No.
Right, so what is the purpose of having that there? What is the purpose of opening the valve and monitoring?
To receive whatever is coming.
Yes.
But there's no requirement at that stage or dedicated assignment of monitoring, because they don't need to monitor what's coming. Is their product, their tank.
That's what it says, though.
You're right.
Monitor the tank levels.
So that's what I'm telling you. That monitoring is not to determine. It's not like if they're buying product and they say, well, I'm buying 1,000 barrels. Let me see how much I actually receive into this tank before I pay you.
Right, well, that's why I referred you to the previous paragraph, number 12. Open the tank valve to receive line content of 66.
Because line content is coming to occupy the storage for a while before when the work is finished to pump back. Because the scope of works require pumping back some product back into the line.
Okay. But
so at that point, so I understand what you're saying. You know, what I'm saying to you, sir, had there been the system where X, you pump, A, you go and check that we want to pump out a certain amount, we're looking for a ledge of 35 feet. Look and see what's coming at you there. Everyone say, well, we expect to pump out about 100 barrels, 60 barrels, 70 barrels. If that assignment is set up or that work schedule is set up, I agree with you, sir, that the person at the tank will say, you tell me 100, man, across 200 are going on here.
Yeah.
But what is happening here, from I understand this document, is that tank farm, we want to borrow some storage. Open up, we're using 111.
Right.
We go in and pump. Check and make sure.
And the man at the other end says, well, how much are you going to be pumping in before I decide which tank to let you use?
Well,
how much are you giving us?
That's why well, that's it. No, well, they're using 111 because they know that is available, but they're telling him to monitor it to make sure that it all goes well. That's a standard step.
Yeah, but
to monitor the gauge and the pressure.
All right. I mean, I hear what you're saying. And I will give it further thought in the light of what you've been saying to me. But I have to say I'm struggling a little to understand anything other than that the Paria had the information as to the barrel quantity. And I'm the first to accept that it would be necessarily an imprecise number. But we're not dealing with some minor discrepancy between what might have come out of the line and the amount that was actually required to come out of the line. We're dealing with hundreds and hundreds, if not 1,000 barrels more than should have been necessary. And that should have set off an alarm. Now, irrespective, it seems to me, of what was or was not done, and we know it couldn't have been done on the day, for the future, and for our purposes in making recommendations so as to avoid this ever happening again, it's clear, isn't it, that it is A, capable of being measured, the amount that is taken out of any line, B, capable of identifying the sort of quantity that is necessary to achieve the purpose being sought, and 3, that there should, once you've made that measurement, for somebody to be standing by that and saying to the people who are doing the blowing or pumping, you're done, we've got enough, thank you very much. And if it's not showing it at their end, that would cause an alarm to be rung as to what the position might be.
Exactly, sir. Let me see if I can assist you. That, sir, is a correct procedure, and the alarm bell would be rung.
Yes.
And people down at 36, they would say, what's going on? Look at what we get in.
Right.
But that's what I'm saying, sir. You see that is a perfect recommendation going forward. But when we're looking at the event, we're looking back at what happened on the 25th. Had there been that correlation and the dedication at both points, I could see anybody at the other point raising an alarm. But that seems not to have been the arrangement.
No.
But going forward, I think it's a perfect recommendation.
Right. Well, I'm grateful for that. But the only point I suppose I'm making is that it wasn't beyond the wit of man to have thought of that then. I appreciate they didn't, but it seems a pretty straightforward thing to have done. How much are we taking out of this line?
So I think what the flip side of that, I think, is the aim was really 35 feet, and everybody knows once they get to 35 feet and monitoring that, they couldn't take out that much.
All right.
So there was nothing would alert them to put a second monitoring on that side. Now we know. But if they were dipping and they saw an empty line, then they would know, well, look, where all of this oil gone? But when they dip in and they get, as Mr. Khan pointed out, a wrong measurement, but they get into 30, 35, they say, right. And that is, well, we all know from what flowed from that.
Yeah, all right. Thank you. Yeah.
And the last piece of evidence on that point came from Mr. Khan.
Sorry, yes, you'd said 4 points, and this is your fifth.
Yes.
Thank you.
The evidence of Mr. Khan that, as an expert witness, he gave oral evidence to the effect that the divers would not have been sucked into the pipeline if LMCS had effectively only removed the contents of the line to a depth of 35 feet or ullage of 35 feet. Because as we accept now, and from his assistance, there would have been no delta P. Well, I don't want to say delta P event. I'm kind of scared to label it now. It's event. Delta P event.
Yes. I'm in the same situation. I'm slightly scared about using the expression, but
yes.
I think he means there would have been no delta P event.
Yes. So that's correct. No delta P event. Accordingly, Given the contents of the LMCS tender package and the documents produced before the award of the contract, the retention of an independent professional with sufficient knowledge, skill, and experience to evaluate the technical aspects of the bid received could not have reasonably resulted in LMCS bid being deficient or rejected. Because when one looks at LMCS, the removal of the 35 feet, that was perfect and that was reasonable. And the reason the bid would not have been rejected as being deficient is that looking at that bid, no one would have also seen the issue of delta P arising, because getting an knowledge of 35 feet would not have bring a delta P event into play. And that is why in my opening to this commission, I said I'd searched all the documents and I could not find in the bid and tender documents any expression of delta P.
Yeah, you're pushing an open door there. I think we're all agreed about that. But I suppose my concern about it is this, is that if the purpose of taking a knowledge of 35 feet on either side was so as to ensure that the line remained full, so as to ensure that there was no delta P event, why wasn't that ever expressed by anybody?
The words delta P.
Well,
yeah.
That's just what I've said.
Yeah.
That we only want to take a 35-foot ullage at either side because we're going to put it in the plug. We need to retain the fluid in the pipe so as to ensure that no delta P event or delta P, latent delta P would exist and therefore not trigger any event when removing the plug.
Mr. Ali's answer to that is, well, he factored it in by putting it on a solid liquid leg, putting the plugs onto that, so he knew that by that delta P wouldn't feature.
Are we agreed that when working on pipes this way, that there should be a heading somewhere in either the method statement, in the bid, in the work permit? I don't really mind particularly where it appears, but it should appear somewhere that delta P has been considered.
It just took my second recommendation. I was hoping to make.
I've just eliminated your second one.
Yes.
Right, okay, great.
Sorry
about that.
It's like we do in judicial review.
Yes.
You state that there's no other alternative remedy.
Yes.
You have to say that.
Yes.
You tend to say that.
Quite.
So it's like one of those. You put delta P and you say, well, it does not arise, I eliminate it.
Because X, Y, we've done this.
This is how I eliminate it.
Yes.
But going forward, that's a good recommendation.
Right.
Sir.
All right. Thank you very much.
So in the circumstances, Mr. Chairman, it cannot be reasonably argued that any causative link exists between Paria's acts or omission in connection with the tender process and the delta P event, which occurred on the 25th. Indeed, given LMCS's stated method of work as identified at the tender stage, the possibility of a delta P event occurring could not have been reasonably foreseeable. I take a point, sir, with respect to avoiding that. You state it in future, you put it under heading, you put it under rubric, and you cater.
I know, but you and I have come to this relatively soon, recently, I suspect, in dealing with pipes and the like. But those who've been involved as part of their entire careers in the operations of hydrocarbons and pipes and the kind of environment which we all visited, I don't think you did, but we visited recently at Paria, surely must recognize that there exists at least the potential for a delta P event when there are likely to be differential pressures on either side of valves and pipes that are being opened and closed on a regular basis. Just taking fuel out of a tank there must be an opening somewhere on the tank to allow the air to fill up the void, otherwise you're going to create a vacuum, and all these sorts of things must be surely at the forefront of the minds of those who are working in the industry.
That is in fact so, sir, but I am attracted and reminded to brought to mind the evidence of Ms. Catherine Balkisoon. She said what she would do as an engineer is engineer it out. Right. So I think that is what Mr. Ali and they may have done in the bid. They recognize we're dealing with pipelines, we're dealing with clearing. How do we, although, again, it didn't find expression in those words in the bid, but he probably say, well, if I keep the content in the line, go down 35 feet, put my plug on a solid liquid, delta P does not arise, I don't need to cater for that.
It never arises, yeah. Yes. No, whether that's a true expression of what they were thinking at the time, or whether that's a post-event analysis, I'm not sure. But I take the point. But it is surprising, is that nobody anywhere in the thousands of pages that we've got dealing with experts from all over this field, anybody mentioned it at all. All right. Thank you.
No, you can't. So taking the fact that the bid, when one assesses the bid in that way, so it really removes, had it been executed in the manner intended, the hazardous nature of those works. I now want to move on to the contract itself. So. Okay. The contract was awarded on June 1st, 2021. Paria awarded that contract for the works to LMCS. Apart from the contractual terms and conditions contained in the invitation to bid document, which comprised, among other things, the technical scope of works, the commercial proposal, and the accompanying drawings, LMCS was also bound by Paria's general conditions of contract. Those general conditions of contract could be found at page 973 of the core bundle and at paragraph 34 of the statement of Mr. Michael Wee of the 16th of August 2022. The contract imposed the following material and extensive contractual obligations on LMCS.
The contract or the conditions, Paria's conditions of contract?
The technical scope of works, sir.
Thank you.
As outlined in the technical scope of works. And some of them I wish to highlight as follows. LMCS had the obligation under item 3.1.4 to verify all measurements information on site prior to fabrication and removal of the riser in that section of the pipe. Item 3.1.5, LMCS was required to perform the following activities: isolation, de-isolation, depressurization, pressurization, and draining and filling of product from sea line 36 at berths 6 and berths 5. Under 5.1, LMCS was required to supply adequate, competent, and certified licensed labor for the specific job functions, and provide full-time supervision. Also, tools and equipment for the timely completion of the scope of works. At item 5.1.2, LMCS became familiar with and conformed to Paria's permit to work procedure.
You mean 5.12?
Yes, it would be, yeah. I think it's 5.12. I think we had 5.
Yeah, it's 5.12.
5.12.
Contractors shall become familiar with and conform to Paria's permit to work procedure.
And maintain permits to execute
at his own
entire job.
expense and limitations,
Yes.
provisions or requirements pertaining to the permits. Yeah.
Full stop, it wasn't.
Yes.
Yes, because at 5.16, LMCS was required to prepare a job hazard analysis and risk assessment for review by Paria.
Yes.
At item 5.18, LMCS was to follow all guidelines within Paria's health and safety requirements for contractors.
Yep.
Under item 6.1.1, LMCS was required to instruct its personnel on the safety regulations, safe working practices, and conditions that are required for an industrial marine environment. I wish to draw the Commission's attention to item 6.1.2, that LMCS was to provide and maintain all safety equipment and requirements necessary for its personnel and for execution of work, and that LMCS was required to instruct its personnel on their proper use and maintenance. At item 8.9, subparagraph 4, LMCS was required to conduct suitable and sufficient risk assessment or job hazard analysis for all activities and all work permits, and that it developed and implement the appropriate controls to ensure that the risk is as low as reasonably practicable.
This is 8.9.
Yes, 8.9, sub 40.
Right, sorry, yes. Risk assessment, JHA, and job safety method statement, yes?
Yes.
Thank you.
At item 8.9, subparagraph 5.2, LMCS was to ensure that its personnel have the required training and certification to carry out their duties in a safe manner.
Just a minute. 8.9, 5. I've only got a 5. I don't have a 5.2.
So this might have been
8.9 is the subheading HSE requirements for contractors, and you're directing me to. I've got a 5 which says awareness, training, and certification. Is that what you're referring to?
So it may be. I was just trying to get the hard copy, and because we typing through the night, so just, when I get some sleep, I'll be able to tell when it's.
All right. Well, look, I mean, come back to it by all means. I just want to make sure that I've made a note of everything that you're saying.
Yeah. Check the number. 8.9, subparagraph 5. It's 5.2. Yeah, I'll move on. At item 8.9, subparagraph 8.0, LMCS personnel are required to follow Paria's permit to work procedure at all times. I wish to bold that and underline it too. At
you want me to underline what?
At all times. And item 8.9, subparagraph 9.2, LMCS was to provide...
Again, I don't have a 9.2.
9.0.
I've got a 9, supervision. That's it.
A 9.0, sir. You got the other one? 5.
I'm looking at page 593, which is the...
Yes, and to back up, so we just found it is 5.0 and not 5.2, and the earlier one. So it's item 8.9, subparagraph 5.0.
Yes.
The last 3 lines of that paragraph.
Okay, the contractor shall ensure that all personnel have the required training and certification
Yes.
to carry out their duties in a safe manner, etc. Yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And the last one I wish, the last one I wish to refer you to says item 8.9. See, I'm conscious now of checking all
There's no 8.9, there's an 8. And there's a 9.
There's an 8.9, it's a paragraph. Yeah, there's an 8.9. No, that's what I think.
The whole thing is under subparagraph 8.9.
8.
And then it's divided, slightly confusingly, into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
Yes.
8, 9. And it's not the easiest document to follow, which is why I want to make sure I've got a note of what you're saying.
8.0.
8.9, subparagraph 8.0.
Right.
8.
8.9, subparagraph 8.0.
Right.
And this one is which one? 10. Make sure there's a 10. Right. And this one is,
This is the one you said at all times I should underline, which I have.
both have at all times. I think, Michael and them saying that is adding an M. And them saying it's possible.
9 is supervision, which is what I anticipate you're going to next.
Yes, sir.
Contractor shall provide
Competent supervision at all times. That's another at all times to be
Yes.
underlined and
Yes.
highlighted. Sir. If you find it, I could always come back to it. And on the other hand, so Paria's contractual obligations were extremely limited in nature under the contractual terms.
Well, I think Paria's responsibilities are in a document that ranges over a total of 20. Sorry, ranges over 20 pages or so, in quite fine print with many paragraphs and subparagraphs. The obligations that Paria takes upon itself manages to cover, I think, 8 lines.
Yes, sir.
Not exactly taking a great deal upon your own shoulders, are you?
Independent contractors.
That's why you hire an independent contractor. Fine, thank you.
So, and this is a convenient time to take the break
It
before.
sounds like a very sensible time to take lunch.
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. We will resume at 2 o'clock, please. 2 o'clock.